Sabrina noticed it in the way Miles stopped asking. He used to reach for things. Not even big things, just small ones like the edge of the table or the sleeve of her jacket when she stood too far away. He would try, fail, and still try again. There was something stubborn in him back then, but that morning, his hand stayed still. He sat in the chair near the window, watching the light move across the floor as if it belonged to someone else. When the toy slipped from his lap, he didn't even look down, just waited. Sabrina stood there longer than she should have, holding her phone, a message half written to another specialist she didn't believe in. Miles didn't call her name. That was what stayed with her, not the silence, the acceptance of it. The house was too quiet for that time of day. It wasn't supposed to be. There were scheduled things. Always scheduled things. A nurse had left an hour ago. Physical therapy was marked for the afternoon. There were reminders set, systems in place, everything arranged so nothing would fall apart. Still, the quiet stayed. Sabrina moved through the hallway without thinking about where she was going. Her heels made a sound against the floor that felt sharper than usual, like it didn't belong there. She slowed down after a few steps, then stopped completely, as if the house might notice her if she kept moving. She hadn't checked on Miles again. She knew that. The thought came and went without urgency. That part felt worse. When she finally turned toward his room, she didn't rush. There was no reason to. If something had gone wrong, someone would have told her already. That was how things worked now. Problems didn't arrive quietly anymore. They came with reports, with explanations, with plans attached. The door was open. He was in the same chair. The light had shifted further across the floor, stretching toward the opposite wall. It made everything look thinner. Even him. Miles, she said. Not too loud. Just enough. He turned his head slightly, not fully. His eyes found her, but they didn't hold. He looked past her after a second, like he'd already finished the part where he was supposed to respond. She stepped closer. The toy was still on the floor where it had fallen earlier. No one had picked it up. She didn't either. It didn't feel like the right thing to do, though she couldn't explain why. You dropped it, she said. He didn't look down. For a moment she thought he might say something. He used to fill silence with small, uneven words, things that didn't always make sense but felt like effort. Now there was nothing, just the faint sound of his breathing, steady but distant. She crouched in front of him, lowering herself carefully, like the movement needed to be controlled. Her knees pressed against the floor, the fabric of her clothes pulling in ways she wasn't used to noticing. "Do you want me to get it?" she asked. A pause. Then, barely, he shook his head. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't frustration either. It was something quieter than both. Final in a way she didn't understand. Her hand hovered for a second before she let it fall back to her side. "Okay," she said. The word felt incomplete, like it needed something after it. But nothing came. She stayed there longer than she meant to, watching him, waiting for something to change. Some shift in his posture, his expression. Anything that would tell her this was temporary, that it was just a moment. It didn't move. Eventually she stood up. The room felt different from above, like distance made everything harder to read. She adjusted the sleeve of her jacket, though it didn't need adjusting, then stepped back toward the door. "I'll be downstairs," she said. He didn't respond. She left anyway. In the kitchen, everything was in place. Clean counters, no clutter. A glass of water she didn't remember pouring sat near the edge, untouched. She picked it up, took a sip, then set it down again in the exact same spot. Her phone buzzed. She didn't look at it immediately. There had been too many messages like that lately. Recommendations, names, people who specialized in cases like Miles's, though none of them had said what that meant in a way that mattered. They spoke carefully, used the right words, avoided certainty. She picked up the phone anyway. Another number, another message, another offer to review his case. She stared at the screen for a few seconds, then locked it without replying. It wasn't anger. It was something closer to exhaustion, but even that didn't feel accurate. Exhaustion implied effort. She wasn't sure what this was anymore. The sound came from the back hallway. Faint. Brief. She turned her head slightly, listening. Nothing followed. Probably one of the staff. Someone finishing up before leaving. The house had its own rhythm during the day, people moving in and out, doing things that kept everything running without drawing attention to themselves. She let it go. For a moment, then the sound came again. A little clearer this time. Not loud, but distinct enough that it didn't blend into the background. She set the glass down more slowly than before. The hallway felt longer than usual as she walked toward it. The air shifted slightly as she passed through. Cooler, less controlled. The back area of the house always felt different. Less curated, more real in ways she didn't often think about. She turned the corner and stopped. There was someone near the service entrance, a man she didn't recognize. He stood with his back partially turned, holding a cleaning cart to the side. One hand rested on the handle, the other loosely at his side. He wasn't moving. That was what caught her. He wasn't working. He was watching. Not the room, not the hallway. Miles. Sabrina didn't speak right away. Something about the stillness of it made her pause. The man didn't look startled or caught. He just stood there, quiet, his attention fixed past the open doorway that led toward Miles's room. "How long have you been there?" she asked. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. The man turned. Not quickly, just enough to face her. "Not long," he said. His tone was even. No rush to explain. She stepped closer, her posture straightening without effort. "You're new." It wasn't a question. He nodded once. "Started this week." She glanced briefly at the cart. Supplies neatly arranged, nothing out of place. "And you're cleaning staff?" He didn't offer a name. She noticed that. Her gaze shifted back toward the open doorway behind him. From where she stood, she couldn't see Miles directly, but she knew exactly where he would be. In that same chair. Still. "What were you doing?" she asked. The man didn't answer immediately. He looked back toward the doorway for a second, then returned his attention to her. "Just making sure he was okay." The words landed differently than she expected. There was no assumption in them, no overstep in tone. But something about it felt out of place. "That's not your responsibility," she said. "I know." Another pause. Sabrina studied him more carefully now. His posture was relaxed, but not careless. His hands were steady. There was no sign of discomfort in the way he held himself, no attempt to explain further or justify what he had been doing. It unsettled her. "Then don't do that again," she said. He nodded. "All right." No resistance. No argument. She waited for something else, an apology maybe. Some acknowledgement that he understood the boundary she was setting. It didn't come. Instead, he reached for the cart, adjusting one of the bottles slightly as if that had been his intention all along. The movement was small, controlled. Sabrina felt the edge of something she couldn't name. "Finish what you're assigned to do," she added. "I will." Again, calm, unaffected. She turned away before the silence stretched further. Upstairs, Miles hadn't moved. She could tell before she even stepped fully into the room. The light had shifted again, leaving part of his face in shadow now. It made his expression harder to read, though she wasn't sure that mattered anymore. She walked to the chair beside him and sat down. For a while, she didn't say anything. The quiet here felt heavier than it had downstairs, like it belonged to something, not just the absence of sound. Her hand rested on the arm of the chair, close enough to his that she could reach him without leaning. She didn't. After a few minutes, she spoke. "There's someone new working here," she said. The words sounded distant, even to her. "He was standing in the hallway." A pause. "He was watching you." She didn't know why she said that part. Miles blinked slowly. That was all. Sabrina looked at him, waiting for something, confusion maybe, or curiosity. Some reaction that would connect him to what she was saying. Nothing came. Her hand shifted slightly on the armrest, fingers tightening for a second before relaxing again. "It doesn't matter," she said quietly. And this time, she believed it. The therapist arrived late. Not by much. 8 minutes, maybe 10. Still within what most people would consider reasonable. It wouldn't have mattered before. There had been a time when Sabrina adjusted easily, when delays were just part of the day, something to move around without thinking. Now she noticed. Not the delay itself, the way it settled into everything else. By the time the woman stepped into the room, setting her bag down with a quick apology that sounded practiced, Miles had already closed off again. Sabrina saw it happen without being able to point to the exact moment. His shoulders had drawn in slightly. His gaze had lowered. Whatever small opening there might have been earlier, it was gone. "It's been a busy morning," the therapist said, adjusting her sleeves. Traffic was worse than expected. Sabrina nodded once. "That's fine." It wasn't, but there was no energy left to explain why. The session began the way it always did, structured, measured. The therapist moved through the routine with steady efficiency, guiding Miles through small motions, encouraging him in a voice that never changed too much, never risked being too hopeful or too flat. "Let's try lifting the arm again, just a little." Miles didn't respond right away. The therapist waited, then gently repositioned his arm, guiding it upward. He let her. There was no resistance, but there was no effort either. His body followed because it was being moved, not because he was choosing to move. "Good," she said softly. The word didn't land anywhere. Sabrina stood near the window, watching without stepping in. Her arms were folded, though she didn't remember crossing them. She focused on the small details instead, the angle of his wrist, the way his fingers curled slightly inward, the tension in his neck that seemed to stay no matter how many times it was adjusted. She had learned to look for signs. There just weren't many left. "Okay," the therapist continued, shifting slightly. "Now let's see if we can hold it there on your own." A pause. The therapist eased her support. For just a second the arm stayed where it was. Then it dropped. Not suddenly. Slowly, like it had already decided what it was going to do before the attempt even started. "That's all right," the therapist said quickly. "We'll keep working on it." Sabrina turned her head slightly, looking away. There was something about the speed of that reassurance that bothered her. It came too fast, filled the space before anything real could settle in. Miles didn't react. He didn't look frustrated. He didn't seem tired. There was no visible strain in his face, no sign that the effort had cost him anything. That was the problem. It should have. The session continued. Small movements, repeated instructions, careful encouragement. Everything technically correct. Everything done the way it was supposed to be done. And still nothing changed. After a while, Sabrina stopped watching the details. Her gaze drifted toward the doorway instead, though she didn't know why. The hallway beyond was empty. Quiet in a different way than before. Still controlled. Still orderly. Still wrong. She caught herself thinking about the man again. Not what he had said. The way he had stood there. It hadn't felt like curiosity. Or concern in the way people usually showed it. There had been no urgency in it. No attempt to intervene or make himself part of the moment. Just attention. Steady. Unmoved. She shook the thought off. It didn't belong here. "Let's take a short break," the therapist said after a while, stepping back. Miles's arm rested back at his side. Unchanged, the therapist reached for her bag, pulling out a small device, checking something quickly before looking back at Sabrina. "He's maintaining baseline," she said. The words were careful. Sabrina didn't respond immediately. Baseline. The word had started to lose meaning. It sounded like something that stayed still by design, something that wasn't supposed to shift too much, either forward or back. Safe. Contained. She wasn't sure when she had stopped wanting that. "How long do we keep doing this?" Sabrina asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. The therapist paused. "We're seeing stability," she said. "That's important, especially given I know what stability means." Sabrina didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The therapist closed her mouth for a second, then nodded slightly. "There are limits to how quickly progress can happen," she said more carefully. Another practiced sentence. Sabrina looked at Miles. He hadn't moved. His eyes were open, but there was no focus in them. Just a kind of stillness that made everything around him feel louder than it actually was. "Is this helping him?" she asked. The therapist hesitated. "A small thing." barely noticeable. But it was there. "We're preventing regression," she said. "That wasn't the question." Sabrina let the silence stretch. The therapist shifted her weight slightly, her hands adjusting the edge of her sleeve again, a small repetitive motion that seemed to anchor her. "It's part of a longer process," she added. Sabrina nodded once. The conversation was over. Not because she agreed, because there was nowhere else for it to go. After the session ended, the house settled back into its usual rhythm. The therapist left. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway, then disappeared completely. Somewhere downstairs, a door opened and closed. Distant, controlled. Sabrina stayed in the room. Miles hadn't changed position. She moved closer this time, standing beside him instead of keeping her distance. Her hand hovered again, just above his shoulder. Then, slowly, she placed it there. Light pressure. He didn't pull away. That was something. She adjusted her grip slightly, her fingers pressing just enough to feel the tension beneath the surface. His muscles responded faintly, not with movement, but with resistance. Tight, in a way that didn't match the rest of his stillness. She frowned slightly. That hadn't been mentioned. The reports always covered everything. Range of motion, responsiveness, pain indicators. All of it documented, tracked, explained. But this. She pressed again, a little firmer this time. Miles flinched. Small, quick, but clear. Sabrina's hand pulled back immediately. She looked at him more closely now. "Miles?" Her voice softened without her noticing. He didn't answer, but his breathing had changed. Just slightly. A little faster, a little less even. She crouched again, bringing herself to his level. "Did that hurt?" A pause. Then, barely, he nodded. Something shifted in her chest. Not sharp. Not sudden. Heavy. "How long?" she asked. He didn't respond. She tried again, adjusting her tone. "When did it start?" Silence. His gaze dropped, avoiding hers. Sabrina sat back on her heels, her mind moving through the possibilities quickly, lining them up against everything she had been told, everything that had been ruled out, monitored, controlled. This didn't fit. Or maybe it did, and no one had said it out loud. Her eyes moved toward the doorway again. Empty. Still. But the thought returned anyway. The way the man had been standing there, watching. Not just looking. Noticing. Sabrina stood up slowly. Her movements felt more deliberate now, like each step needed to be placed correctly. "I'll be back," she said. Miles didn't react. She left the room. The hallway felt different this time. Less distant. More immediate. She moved through it with purpose now, her steps quicker, her focus narrowed to a single point, the service area. When she turned the corner, the man was there again. Not in the same spot, but close. He was wiping down a surface, his movement steady, unhurried. The cart stood beside him, everything arranged the same way as before. He didn't look up right away. Sabrina stopped a few feet away. "Hey." The word came out sharper than she expected. He looked up, calm, waiting. She held his gaze for a second. Then, "Earlier," she said, "when you were standing there." He didn't interrupt. "You said you were making sure he was okay." A pause. "Yes." Sabrina took a step closer. "Why?" The question hung there. Simple. Direct. The man set the cloth down on the edge of the cart, his hands resting lightly against the handle. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was the same as before. Because he didn't look like he was. Sabrina felt something tighten. "That's not specific." He nodded slightly. "No." Another pause. Then, "He was holding his shoulder," he said. Not like someone adjusting, like he was trying not to move it. Sabrina's breath caught, just slightly. "He didn't say anything," the man continued, but his posture changed when he thought no one was watching. The words settled into place. Too cleanly. Sabrina studied him. There was no uncertainty in his expression, no hesitation. Just the same steady attention. "How would you know that?" she asked. The question came out quieter this time. He met her gaze. For a second, it seemed like he might not answer. Then, I've seen it before, he said. Not defensive, not explanatory, just a fact. Sabrina held his gaze a moment longer. Then she nodded once. Not in agreement, not yet, but something had shifted. And this time, it didn't feel controlled. That night didn't settle the way it usually did. The house went quiet on schedule. Lights dimmed, doors closed. The last of the staff moved to the lower level and left without drawing attention to themselves. Everything followed the same pattern it always had. But Sabrina didn't go to her room. She stayed downstairs longer than she needed to, sitting at the edge of the dining table with her laptop open and untouched. The screen had gone dark twice before she realized she hadn't been looking at it. Her thoughts kept circling back, not to the conversation itself, to the certainty in his voice. He hadn't guessed. That was what made it harder to dismiss. She leaned back slightly, pressing her fingers against her temple for a moment before letting her hand fall. The room felt colder now, though nothing had changed. Eventually she stood. The walk upstairs felt longer in the quiet. Each step carried a little more weight than it should have, like she was moving through something thicker than air. Miles's door was still open. A soft light spilled into the hallway, steady and low. She paused at the threshold, watching him for a moment before stepping inside. He was in bed. The nurse had come and gone. Everything was arranged properly, blanket tucked, pillows adjusted, his body positioned the way it was supposed to be to avoid strain. The routine had been followed. Still, his shoulders looked tense. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. But now she was. She moved closer, slower this time, as if rushing might change what she saw. Miles, she said quietly. His eyes shifted toward her, more aware than earlier. That at least hadn't changed. She sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the alignment the nurse had set. Her hand hovered again, then rested lightly near his arm. I need you to tell me something, she said. No urgency. Just wait. He blinked. A small acknowledgement. She glanced at his shoulder, then back at his face. When you move it, does it hurt all the time, or just sometimes? The question stayed between them. For a moment, it seemed like he might not answer. His gaze drifted slightly, not away from her, but not fully focused either. Then, slowly, sometimes. His voice was quiet, rougher than she remembered. Sabrina nodded once. Now? A pause. He hesitated. Then, a little. She exhaled, though she hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Why didn't you tell anyone? He didn't answer right away. His fingers shifted slightly against the blanket, a small, uncertain movement. I thought... He started, then stopped. She waited. I thought it was supposed to. The words were soft, almost careful. Something in her chest tightened again, deeper this time. Who told you that? He shook his head. No one. Another pause. They said it might be uncomfortable. Sabrina closed her eyes briefly. Uncomfortable. The word echoed back to her, layered with all the reports, all the explanations that had been delivered in controlled tones, softened just enough to be acceptable. She opened her eyes again. This isn't the same, she said quietly. Miles didn't respond. She looked at him for a long moment, taking in the small details, the way his jaw held slightly tighter than it should have, the faint tension that didn't fully leave his body even at rest. How long had this been happening? The question sat there, unanswered. She adjusted the blanket slightly, more for herself than for him. We're going to figure it out, she said. It wasn't reassurance. It felt more like a decision. Miles didn't react, but his eyes stayed on her a second longer than usual before drifting closed. Sabrina didn't sleep much. When she did, it came in short stretches that ended too quickly. Each time she woke, the same thought returned before anything else had time to form. He didn't tell anyone. By morning, it had settled into something heavier, not just concern, responsibility. She got dressed earlier than usual, moving through her routine without checking the time. There were messages waiting on her phone again, more names, more offers, but she ignored them. Instead, she headed downstairs. The house was still waking up. The early staff moved quietly through the space, setting things in place for the day ahead. The smell of coffee lingered faintly in the air. Sabrina didn't stop. She went straight to the back hallway, the service area. He was there, not standing still this time, working. He was restocking the cart, checking supplies with a level of attention that felt deliberate, not rushed. Each item placed exactly where it belonged. Sabrina slowed as she approached, watching for a second before speaking. "What's your name?" He looked up. There was no surprise in his expression. "Daniel." The name settled easily. She nodded once. "Sabrina." A small pause. "I know." Of course he did. She stepped closer, stopping just within conversational distance. "I need you to explain something to me," she said. Daniel waited. No immediate response, just attention. "You said you've seen that before," she continued. "What exactly does that mean?" He considered the question for a moment, not avoiding it, choosing how to answer. "It means I've worked with people who move like that," he said. Sabrina's gaze sharpened slightly. "Your cleaning staff?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "And before that?" A pause. "Short. I was an occupational therapist." The words didn't come with emphasis. They didn't need to. Sabrina held his gaze. "You were." He nodded. "Yes." Something shifted again, more defined this time. "Why aren't you anymore?" Another pause. Longer. Daniel's eyes dropped briefly to the cart, his hand adjusting one of the bottles slightly before returning to stillness. "It didn't work out," he said. "Not defensive, not detailed, just closed." Sabrina studied him. There was more there, but he wasn't offering it. She let it go for now. "How long did you do it?" she asked instead. "Years." "Not specific." "Still enough." Sabrina nodded slowly, processing. "Then you think something's being missed?" It wasn't phrased as a question. Daniel didn't rush to agree. "I think he's compensating," he said, holding tension in places he shouldn't have to. Sabrina's mind moved quickly, aligning that with what she had seen the night before, with the flinch, the hesitation. "That's causing pain." "Yes." The word landed clean. She exhaled slowly. "And no one else has noticed this?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he did, his tone didn't change. "They're looking at the program," he said, "not at him." The distinction settled heavily. Sabrina looked away for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the hallway beyond. Though she wasn't seeing it, when she looked back, her voice was quieter. "If you're right." She didn't finish the sentence. Daniel didn't either. They didn't need to. A few seconds passed. Then Sabrina straightened slightly. "I want you to take a look at him," she said. "Direct, clear." Daniel didn't move. "That's not my job," he said. "I know." "Then it's not appropriate." Sabrina's jaw tightened slightly. "Appropriate isn't working." The words came out sharper than she intended. Daniel held her gaze, calm, unmoved. There was no resistance in him, but there was no agreement either. "Someone else should handle it," he said. "They already are." A pause. "They're not seeing it." Another pause. The silence stretched. Sabrina felt the weight of it pressing in. This was the point where things usually shifted, where authority filled the gap, where decisions were made because they could be. But something about this didn't respond to that. She took a breath, slower this time. "I'm not asking you to replace anyone," she said, "just to look." Daniel didn't answer. His hand rested lightly on the edge of the cart, fingers still. For a moment it seemed like he might refuse again. Then, "I can observe," he said. "Careful. Limited." Sabrina nodded. "That's enough. For now. And for the first time in a while." It felt like something had actually started. Daniel didn't go upstairs right away. Sabrina noticed that. She had expected him to follow her, or at least move with some sense of urgency once she agreed. That was how most people reacted when given permission to step outside their role. There was usually a shift something in their posture, their pace, a kind of readiness. He stayed where he was, finished adjusting the cart, checked something on the lower shelf, wiped his hands on a cloth that was already clean. Sabrina stood there for a moment, watching him, then turned toward the hallway without saying anything. If he was going to come, he would. Miles was awake, not fully alert but not withdrawn either. His eyes moved when Sabrina entered, following her just enough to show that he was present. She crossed the room and sat in the chair beside his bed. "Someone's going to come in," she said. No explanation. Miles blinked once. She rested her hand lightly against the edge of the mattress, close enough to reach him if she needed to. The space between them felt different now, less distant. After a minute, footsteps approached, measured, even. Daniel paused at the doorway before stepping in. He didn't look around the room, didn't take in the surroundings the way most people did the first time they entered. His attention went straight to Miles. Sabrina noticed that. "This is Daniel," she said. "Simple. No titles." Miles's gaze shifted toward him. Daniel nodded slightly. "Hey." The word was quiet, natural. No attempt to soften his voice, no adjustment. Miles didn't respond. Daniel stepped closer, stopping a few feet from the bed. Not too near, not too far. He stood there for a second, just looking. Not in a way that made the room feel smaller. Just looking. Sabrina felt the urge to fill the silence. She didn't. After a moment, Daniel spoke. "Can I see your shoulder?" Direct. No extra explanation. Miles hesitated. It was small, but clear. Sabrina leaned forward slightly. "It's okay," she said. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it had shifted. Less control. More trust than she was used to offering. Miles looked at her for a second, then back at Daniel. Slowly, he nodded. Daniel stepped closer. His movements were careful, but not overly cautious. He didn't hover, didn't hesitate once he reached the bed. "Tell me if it hurts," he said. Not soft, not sharp, just clear. Miles didn't answer, but his eyes stayed open, focused. Daniel placed his hand lightly near Miles's shoulder. Not directly on it at first, just close enough to feel the tension without pressing into it. He waited. A second. Two. Then he adjusted slightly, his fingers finding a point along the upper arm. Miles flinched. Faster this time. Daniel pulled back immediately. "Okay," he said. Not apologetic, not surprised, just acknowledging. Sabrina felt her breath catch again, but she stayed still. Daniel shifted his position slightly, lowering his hand to a different spot. "Here?" A pause. Miles shook his head. "No." Daniel nodded once. He moved again. A little higher. A little closer to the joint. Miles's breathing changed. Subtle. But there. Daniel's hand stilled. "That's where it starts?" he asked. Miles hesitated, then nodded. Sabrina watched the exchange closely, her focus narrowing to the smallest details. The way Daniel's fingers adjusted, the way Miles responded, not with words, but with shifts in tension, in breath. This wasn't how the sessions usually went. There was no routine here. No sequence, just response. Daniel stepped back slightly, giving space again. "How long has it been like this?" he asked. Miles looked at Sabrina. She felt the weight of that glance. "Answer him," she said quietly. Miles looked back at Daniel. "A while." The words were faint. Daniel nodded. "Does it get worse when you try to lift it?" Miles hesitated. Then, "Yes." Daniel exhaled slowly, almost too quiet to hear. Sabrina caught it anyway. "What does that mean?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at Miles again, his gaze steady. "Try something," he said. Not to Sabrina, to Miles. "Don't lift your arm. Just move your hand a little." Miles frowned slightly. Confusion. Daniel waited. No explanation. After a moment, Miles shifted his hand. Just his hand. A small movement. Nothing else. His shoulders stayed still. His breathing didn't change. Daniel nodded. Again. Miles repeated it. Same result. No tension. No flinch. Sabrina leaned forward slightly. What are you seeing? Daniel glanced at her briefly, then back at Miles. He's guarding the joint, he said. Simple. Because it hurts. Yes. But that's expected, Sabrina said. With his condition, this isn't from his condition. The interruption was quiet, but it landed. Sabrina stopped. Daniel straightened slightly, stepping back just enough to create space. It's mechanical, he said. The way he's been moving, or not moving. Sabrina's mind moved quickly. That doesn't make sense, she said. He's been following the program, Daniel finished. Not dismissive, just completing the thought. Sabrina's jaw tightened. Yes. Daniel nodded once. And the program assumes a certain pattern of movement. A pause. He's not following that pattern. Sabrina looked at Miles. His arm rested at his side. Still. What are you saying, she asked. Daniel didn't rush to answer. He adapted, he said. Probably to avoid pain at some point. Sabrina felt something shift again. Adapted how? He stopped using certain muscles the way he's supposed to, Daniel said. Started compensating with others. Sabrina frowned. And no one noticed that? Daniel didn't respond to that directly. They're measuring outcomes, he said. Not how he's getting there. The distinction settled again. Heavier this time. Sabrina looked back at Miles. How long has this been happening? She asked again. Miles didn't answer. His gaze dropped slightly. Daniel stepped in, just enough to redirect. Does it hurt more after therapy? He asked. Miles nodded. Sabrina closed her eyes for a second, then opened them again. Why didn't anyone say anything? She asked. The question wasn't directed at either of them. It didn't need to be. Daniel didn't answer. Miles didn't either. The room held the silence. Then, what do we do? Sabrina asked. Her voice had changed. Less controlled, more direct. Daniel looked at Miles, then back at her. We stop pushing the movement that's causing pain, he said. That's part of his therapy. Then we change how it's done. Sabrina shook her head slightly. It's not that simple. Daniel didn't argue. No, he said. It's not. A pause, but neither is ignoring it. The words settled. Sabrina looked at him. Really looked this time. Not as staff. Not as someone outside the system she had built. Something else. You're sure about this? She said. It wasn't a challenge. Daniel nodded. Yes. No hesitation. Sabrina exhaled slowly. Her hand moved to the edge of the bed again, fingers resting lightly against the fabric. Miles watched her. Waiting. She felt it. The decision forming before she fully named it. All right, she said, quiet, but final. We try it your way. The room didn't change. Nothing shifted immediately. But something had been set. And this time, it didn't feel temporary. The first change didn't look like much. Sabrina almost missed it. The next morning started the same as every other. The schedule hadn't been adjusted yet. The therapist was still expected in the afternoon. Nothing official had been changed, written, or approved. But when Sabrina entered Miles's room, Daniel was already there. Not close. He stood near the window, a few steps back from the bed, watching without interrupting. The light behind him made his outline softer, less defined, like he was part of the room rather than someone added to it. Miles noticed her first. His eyes shifted toward the door, then back to Daniel, as if he wasn't sure where to settle. Sabrina stepped in slowly. You're early, she said. Not directed at anyone in particular. Daniel nodded once. Had time. That was all. She didn't question it. Instead, she moved toward the chair beside Miles, sitting down the same way she had the night before. Close, but not touching. What are you doing? She asked after a moment. Daniel's attention stayed on Miles. Watching how he rests, he said. Sabrina glanced at Miles. He looked the same. Still. Quiet. What does that tell you? Daniel shifted slightly, his weight moving from one foot to the other. not restless, just adjusting. He's still guarding it, he said. Sabrina followed his gaze. Miles's shoulder was barely raised, a small tension that didn't fully release even when he wasn't moving. She hadn't seen that before. Or maybe she hadn't been looking. Daniel stepped closer, stopping at the same distance as yesterday. Miles, he said, can we try something? Miles hesitated, then nodded. Daniel crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to eye level. Don't move your arm, he said. Just breathe. Sabrina frowned slightly. That's it. Daniel didn't look at her. Yes. Miles blinked. His brow tightened just a little, like he was trying to understand what was being asked of him. Slow, Daniel added. Not big breaths. Just let it happen. Miles's chest rose, fell. At first nothing changed. Then his shoulder dropped, barely. So small it could have been nothing. Sabrina leaned forward slightly, her attention sharpening. Again, Daniel said quietly. Miles inhaled, exhaled. This time, the tension shifted a little more. Not gone, just less fixed. Sabrina felt something catch in her chest. What is that? She asked. Daniel stood up slowly. He's holding tension without realizing it, he said. We need to teach him to notice it first. Sabrina looked back at Miles. His face hadn't changed much. Still calm, still quiet. But something about the way his body rested. It was different. Not completely. Just enough. Does it hurt? Daniel asked. Miles shook his head. No. The word came easier than it had the night before. Daniel nodded. Good. He stepped back again, giving space. That's where we start. Sabrina sat there watching. No machines, no structured sequence, just breathing. It felt too simple. And yet, it was the first thing that hadn't made him flinch. The therapist arrived on time that day. Sabrina met her in the hallway before she reached Miles's room. I want to adjust today's session, Sabrina said. The therapist paused, her expression shifting slightly. What kind of adjustment? Sabrina held her gaze. We're going to take a step back from the shoulder work. A beat. The therapist's posture straightened. Based on what? Pain. The word landed. The therapist frowned slightly. He hasn't indicated he has, Sabrina said. Quiet, but firm. The therapist hesitated. For how long? I don't know. Another pause. That's something we should evaluate, the therapist said carefully, before changing the program. Sabrina nodded once. We will. But in the meantime, we're not pushing it. The therapist looked at her. Really looked. Trying to measure how fixed this decision was. Sabrina didn't move. After a moment, the therapist exhaled. All right, she said. We can modify today. Not agreement. Adjustment. It was enough. The session felt different from the start, not just because of what they weren't doing, because of what they were. Daniel stayed in the room. Not close, not involved, just there. The therapist noticed him. Her eyes lingered for a second longer than necessary. Is he? She started. He's observing, Sabrina said. The therapist nodded slowly. No further questions. But the shift in her posture was clear. More controlled, more aware. They began with smaller movements. Hands, wrists, no pressure on the shoulder. Miles responded differently. There was still effort, still hesitation, but the sharp stops, the ones that had come before, weren't there. Good, the therapist said after a few minutes. And this time, the word landed somewhere. Sabrina saw it in the way Miles's fingers moved again without prompting. Small, but willing. Daniel watched quietly. His attention didn't move. Not once. Later, after the session ended, Sabrina found him in the same place as before. The service hallway. The cart. Everything in order. You didn't say anything, she said. Daniel looked up. There wasn't anything to say. Sabrina crossed her arms, though she didn't realize she had. You saw it. A pause. Yes. And. He considered the question. Better than yesterday, he said. Not praise, not dismissal, just observation. Sabrina studied him. That's all. For now. She exhaled slowly. That's not how this usually works. Daniel's expression didn't change. I know. Another pause. Sabrina shifted slightly, her weight moving to one side. What happens next? She asked. Daniel looked at her, then, briefly, passed her toward the hallway that led back to Miles. We keep it small, he said. Small, until his body trusts the movement again. Sabrina frowned slightly. And how long does that take? Daniel didn't answer right away. When it stops expecting pain, he said. Not a time frame, not a promise. Sabrina looked away for a moment, then back. That's not something I can measure. Daniel nodded. No. The word settled. And for once, that didn't feel like a problem. That evening, Miles stayed awake longer. Not restless, just present. Sabrina sat beside him again, the same way she had the night before. But the room felt different, less heavy. What did you do today? She asked. Miles looked at her, then, slowly, nothing. The word came with the smallest hint of something else, not frustration, not disappointment. Sabrina watched him for a second, then nodded. Okay. She didn't correct him, didn't explain, because somehow it didn't feel like nothing. The changes didn't announce themselves. They showed up in places that were easy to overlook if you weren't paying attention the right way. Sabrina started noticing them in the pauses, the spaces between things. Miles didn't rush through movements anymore. Not that he ever had, but there was less resistance in the way he settled afterward. His hand would shift, then stay where it landed instead of retreating immediately. His breathing didn't tighten as often. It wasn't progress in the way she had been taught to recognize. There were no numbers attached to it, no visible milestones. Still, it held. That was new. Daniel kept his distance. He came in the morning sometimes. Not always, never the same exact time. He didn't interrupt sessions, didn't correct anyone openly. If Sabrina hadn't been looking for him, she might have missed how often he was there. But he was, watching, waiting. Sabrina had stopped questioning that. Instead, she started asking different things. How do you know when to stop? She asked one afternoon. Standing beside him in the hallway, Daniel didn't look away from the open doorway. When he tenses before the movement, he said. Sabrina followed his gaze. Miles was sitting upright, his hand resting on his lap. The therapist guided him through a small wrist rotation. Smooth, controlled, no hesitation. And if he doesn't tense? She asked. Then we keep going. Simple. Sabrina crossed her arms lightly. That seems subjective. Daniel nodded. It is. She exhaled. That's not how this usually works. I know. There it was again. That quiet acknowledgement. Not resistance, not agreement, just fact. Sabrina looked back into the room. Miles shifted slightly, adjusting his position without prompting. The movement was small, but there was intention behind it. Not forced, not guided. He was choosing it. Her eyes stayed on him a second longer. Show me, she said. Daniel glanced at her. What to look for? A pause. Then he nodded. Watch his neck, he said. Sabrina frowned slightly. His neck? When he's about to feel pain, it tightens first. She looked closer. At first, she didn't see it. Then, there. A slight pull, barely visible, before the movement even happened. The therapist hadn't noticed. Or maybe she had, but it hadn't changed what she was doing. Stop, Daniel said quietly. Sabrina blinked. What? Daniel nodded toward the room. Now. Sabrina stepped forward, pushing the door open just enough. Wait, she said. The therapist paused mid-instruction, her hand still lightly guiding Miles's arm. What is it? Sabrina hesitated. For a second she almost stepped back, almost let it continue. Then his neck, she said. It tightened. The therapist looked at her, then at Miles. A brief assessment. I don't see. Just wait, Sabrina said. Quieter this time? The therapist held her position. Miles stayed still. A few seconds passed. Then, his shoulders softened. The tension eased. The moment passed. Sabrina felt it. Not physically, but clearly. She looked at Daniel. He gave a small nod. That was it. After the therapist left, Sabrina didn't follow her out right away. She stayed in the room. Miles was tired, but not withdrawn. That was becoming a pattern. Effort without shutdown. She sat beside him, watching the way his hand rested against the blanket. It moved slightly, not from instruction, from restlessness, or maybe curiosity. She wasn't sure. Does it feel different? She asked. Miles looked at her. A pause, then a little. The words came easier now. Still quiet, but less distant. Sabrina nodded slowly. Better? Another pause. He thought about it. Not worse. She almost smiled, but didn't. Later that evening, Daniel was in the kitchen. Not working, just standing near the counter, a glass of water in his hand. Sabrina hesitated at the doorway. This wasn't where she usually spoke to staff. But he didn't feel like staff anymore, not in the way that fit in the categories. You were right, she said. Daniel looked up. Didn't respond immediately. I saw, she added. The tension. He nodded once. That's good. Not pride, not satisfaction, just acknowledgement. Sabrina stepped further into the room. How long would that have gone unnoticed? She asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He set the glass down, his fingers resting lightly against the rim. A while, he said. The words settled heavily. Sabrina looked down for a second, then back up, and the pain would have stayed. Simple. Direct. She exhaled slowly. I've had the best people working with him. It wasn't defensive. It sounded more like something she was trying to understand. Daniel nodded. I'm sure you have. A pause. They're not wrong, he added. They're just not seeing this part. Sabrina leaned back slightly against the edge of the counter. That's a problem. Yes. The agreement came easily. No hesitation. Sabrina looked at him. Really looked this time. Not at his role. Not at what he was supposed to be. At what he was doing. You didn't tell me everything before, she said. Daniel's expression didn't change. No. Why? A pause. He considered the question. Because you wouldn't have listened. Sabrina didn't respond immediately. The words weren't harsh. They weren't meant to be. But they landed. She thought about it. About the first time she saw him, the way she had dismissed it, the way she had shut it down before understanding what she was looking at. You're right, she said, quiet, honest. Daniel nodded once. No reaction beyond that. The silence stretched. But it wasn't uncomfortable. Just present. Sabrina straightened slightly. What else am I not seeing? She asked. The question came without defense this time. Daniel held her gaze. Then you're trying to fix everything at once, he said. Sabrina frowned slightly. That's my job. Yes. A pause. But he doesn't work like that. She looked away for a second. Then back. What does he need? Daniel didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was the same as always. Time to trust that it won't hurt. The words settled into the room. Quiet. Heavy. Sabrina nodded slowly. That wasn't something she could schedule. Or accelerate. Or control. And for the first time, she didn't try to argue with that. Progress didn't stay steady. Sabrina learned that slowly. At first, it felt like it might. The small changes continued. Miles holding a position a second longer, adjusting without pulling back, breathing through movements that used to stop him. It built something quiet in the room. Not hope, exactly. Something more careful than that. But it didn't hold. The shift came without warning. It was late afternoon. The kind of hour where everything slowed down slightly, where the house settled into a quieter rhythm before evening picked up again. Miles was sitting upright. They had been working through small movements again. Hands, wrists, controlled. Familiar now. Daniel stood near the window, not speaking, watching. Sabrina sat closer than she used to, her attention fixed on the space between effort and strain, the place she was still learning to recognize. Again, Daniel said. Miles moved his hand. Smooth, no tension. Good. Another repetition. Then, something changed. It was quick, easy to miss. Miles's fingers paused halfway through the motion. His breath caught just slightly, but enough. Sabrina leaned forward. What is it? Miles didn't answer. His shoulder tightened. The same place. The same pattern. Daniel stepped in immediately. Stop. Not loud, but firm. Miles froze. His hand dropped back to his lap. The tension didn't release. It stayed. Sabrina felt it before she understood it. What happened? She asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He watched Miles closely. Where does it hurt? He asked. Miles shook his head. I don't know. The words came quicker this time, less distant, but strained. Daniel nodded slightly. Don't move, he said. Then he stepped back. Not closer. Back, creating space. Sabrina frowned. Why are you? Wait, Daniel said. She stopped. The room held still. Miles's breathing was uneven now, not sharp, but unsettled. Sabrina watched his shoulder. The tension stayed longer than before. It didn't release with stillness. It didn't ease with breath. It held. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. More focused, more precise. Okay, he said after a moment. We're done. Just like that. Sabrina blinked. That's it? Daniel nodded. For now. Sabrina looked at Miles. He didn't argue, didn't push. He looked, relieved, and that didn't feel right. The rest of the afternoon didn't recover. Miles stayed quieter than usual, not withdrawn, but careful. Every movement looked measured, like he was thinking about it before it happened, even the small ones. Sabrina noticed it in everything. The way he adjusted his position, the way his hand rested, the way he avoided using his shoulder at all. She stood in the doorway for a long time watching him. Daniel had left the room. Not far. Just enough to give space. Sabrina stepped back into the hallway. He was there. Leaning lightly against the wall, arms relaxed at his sides. You stopped too early, she said. It came out sharper than she meant it to. Daniel looked at her. No. He was fine before that. No, he wasn't. The answer came without hesitation. Sabrina's jaw tightened. He didn't say it hurt. He didn't have to. The words landed. Sabrina took a step closer. We were making progress. Daniel nodded. Yes. And now we just stop? Yes. Sabrina let out a short breath. That doesn't make sense. Daniel didn't move. He hit a limit, he said. If we push past it, we lose what we built. Sabrina shook her head slightly. That's not how improvement works. Daniel held her gaze. It is with him. The certainty in his voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Sabrina looked away for a second, then back. He's going to regress. Daniel shook his head. No. How do you know that? A pause. Because we didn't force it. The words stayed between them. Simple, but heavy. Sabrina felt something tighten in her chest. Not panic, not frustration. Something closer to uncertainty, a place she didn't operate from. We can't just wait every time something gets hard, she said. Daniel nodded. Agreed? Then what are we doing? Another pause. Letting his body reset before we ask it again. Sabrina exhaled slowly. That sounds like waiting. It's not. The answer came just as steady as everything else he said. Sabrina looked at him, trying to find something to push against. Something unclear. There wasn't much. How long? She asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. Until the tension drops on its own, he said, again. Not measurable, not controlled. Sabrina looked back toward Miles's room. The door was still open. She could see part of him from where she stood. Still, quiet. "You're asking me to trust something I can't see," she said. Daniel followed her gaze, then looked back at her. "No," he said. "I'm asking you to watch it." That night felt heavier, not like before. Before, the weight had come from stillness, from nothing changing. Now, it came from not knowing which direction they were moving in. Sabrina sat beside Miles again. The same chair, the same position. But the room felt different, more fragile. "How does it feel?" she asked. Miles looked at her. "Okay." The word came after a pause. "Too quick," Sabrina noticed. "Where?" Another pause. He hesitated. Then, "My shoulder." There it was. Sabrina nodded slowly. "More than before?" Miles thought about it, then nodded. "A little." Sabrina looked down for a second, then back at him. "Do we push too much?" The question came out quieter than she expected. Miles didn't answer right away. "Then I don't know. Honest. Simple." Sabrina nodded. Her hand rested against the edge of the bed again. Close. Not touching. "We'll figure it out," she said. But this time, it didn't feel like a decision. It felt like something she was trying to believe. Later, when the house had gone quiet, Sabrina found Daniel again. He was outside, near the back of the house where the lights didn't reach as far. He stood near the edge of the garden, looking out at nothing in particular. She stepped closer. "You're not sure either," she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel didn't turn right away. "No," he said. Sabrina felt something shift. "You've been certain about everything else." "Not everything." The correction was small, but clear. She crossed her arms lightly. That didn't look like progress. Daniel nodded. "It wasn't." The words settled. "Then, what was it?" she asked. Daniel finally turned to face her. "A reminder," he said. "Of what?" "That this isn't linear." Sabrina exhaled slowly. "I know that." "Yes." A pause. "But knowing it and feeling it are different." Sabrina looked away. He wasn't wrong. She hated that. "What if we're making it worse?" she asked. The question came out before she could stop it. Daniel didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice stayed even. "Then we adjust." Not reassurance. Not dismissal. Just direction. Sabrina nodded slowly. That was all they had. And for the first time since this started, it didn't feel like enough. The next morning didn't offer anything clear. No sign that the setback had passed. No obvious drop in tension. No reassurance that they were still moving in the right direction. Miles was quieter, not withdrawn, but careful in a way that made Sabrina uneasy. His movements had shrunk again, not because he couldn't do them, but because he seemed to be choosing not to risk them. She saw it in the way he reached for things. Or didn't. A glass of water sat just slightly out of reach on the table beside him. He looked at it. Not long. Just enough to register it was there. Then he waited. Sabrina stepped forward and handed it to him without saying anything. He took it, drank, set it down. No attempt to adjust its position. No effort to reach again. That was new. And it stayed with her longer than it should have. Daniel didn't come in right away. Sabrina noticed that too. She found herself looking toward the doorway more often than usual, expecting him to appear the way he had been. Quiet, unannounced, already observing before anyone realized he was there. He didn't. The room held its own rhythm. Slower. More uncertain. By mid-morning, Sabrina stepped out into the hallway. He was there. Not near the door this time. Further down, near the window. Standing still, watching the light shift across the floor. "You're late," she said. Not accusing, just stating. Daniel glanced at her. "I waited." "For what?" He nodded toward the room, for him to settle. Sabrina frowned slightly. "He's been sitting there all morning." Daniel didn't move. "That doesn't mean he's settled." The distinction landed. Sabrina looked back toward the room. Then at him. "You think he's worse?" Daniel shook his head. "I think he's protecting it more." A pause. "Because it still hurts." Yes. The word didn't change. Sabrina exhaled slowly. And we just let that happen? Daniel looked at her. No. Another pause. We work around it. Sabrina held his gaze. That sounds like avoiding it. Daniel shook his head again. It's respecting it. The difference sat between them. Sabrina didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure which one she believed. When they went back into the room, nothing had changed on the surface. Miles sat the same way. The light fell the same way. The stillness held. Daniel didn't approach him immediately. He stayed near the door, watching, waiting. Sabrina stepped closer to the bed. Miles, she said softly. His eyes shifted toward her. We're gonna try something different today. No explanation. Just enough. Miles blinked, then nodded. Daniel moved then, slowly. Not toward the shoulder, not toward the arm. He crouched near the foot of the bed, lower, out of the usual line of focus. Put your feet flat, he said. Miles hesitated, then adjusted. It took effort, more than it should have for something that small. Sabrina noticed. Daniel didn't comment. Now just press them down, he said. Miles frowned slightly. Why? The question came quiet, but clear. Daniel met his gaze. Because your body needs somewhere else to hold. Sabrina felt something shift at that. Miles looked uncertain. Then, he pressed his feet down. Lightly. Nothing happened at first. Then his shoulders dropped. Just a little. Not completely, but enough. Sabrina leaned forward slightly. What is that? Daniel didn't look at her. Redistributing effort, he said. Simple. Miles blinked. His breathing steadied. The tension in his neck softened. Sabrina watched closely now. Every detail. Again, Daniel said. Miles pressed his feet down a little more firmly. His posture adjusted. Not forced. Not guided. Just shifted. The shoulder didn't rise, didn't tighten. It stayed. Neutral. Sabrina felt something in her chest loosen. Not fully, but enough. Now move your hand, Daniel said. Miles hesitated. Then, he did. Slow. Controlled. No flinch. No pause. The movement completed. Clean. Sabrina exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath again. Miles looked at his hand. Then at Daniel. Then, back at Sabrina. There was something new in that look. Not excitement, not relief. Recognition. He felt it too. They didn't push further. Daniel stopped the moment the movement settled. That's it, he said. Sabrina blinked. All ready? Daniel nodded. Yes. She almost argued, almost asked for more, but she stopped herself, watched instead. Miles didn't look disappointed. He looked steady. That was different from before. Before, stopping early felt like something was being taken away. Now, it felt like something was being kept. The therapist arrived later that afternoon. Sabrina met her the same way she had the day before, but this time, there was less hesitation. We're continuing the modified approach, Sabrina said. The therapist nodded slowly. I reviewed my notes, she said. There wasn't any indication of. There is now, Sabrina said. Not sharp, just certain. The therapist studied her for a moment, then nodded again. All right. The session adjusted. Again. But this time, Sabrina stayed closer, watched more carefully. She saw it now. The neck. The breath. The small shifts before the movement. Things she hadn't been trained to look for. But now, she could not see them. That evening, Miles didn't wait for things the same way. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even consistent, but it was there. The glass of water sat in the same place. Sabrina noticed it immediately. She didn't move, didn't step forward, just watched. Miles looked at it, paused. Miles looked at it, paused. Then, his hand moved. Slow, careful. He reached. His fingers brushed the edge, adjusted. Then, He picked it up. Sabrina didn't react, didn't speak. But something inside her shifted. Quiet, heavy, real. Miles took a sip, set the glass back down, this time closer, within reach. Later that night, Sabrina stood in the doorway of his room longer than usual. He was asleep. The same light, the same stillness, but it didn't feel as heavy. Not empty, just quieter. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. Daniel. He didn't step inside, just stood beside her. "You saw it," he said. Not a question. Sabrina nodded. "Yes." A pause. "He moved without pulling back." Daniel nodded once. "That's trust." The word settled. Different from before. Not something that needed to be built in big ways. Something smaller. Repeated. Sabrina looked at Miles, then back at Daniel. "This still doesn't feel stable," she said. Daniel didn't disagree. "It isn't." Another pause, "But it's real." Sabrina let that sit. Didn't push against it. Didn't try to reshape it into something more certain. For the first time, she let it be what it was, and somehow that felt stronger than anything they'd had before. The first time Miles stood without hesitation, it almost didn't register. It happened in the middle of something ordinary. No one had prepared for it. No one had marked the moment. Sabrina was sitting across the room going through messages she wasn't reading. The same pattern names, updates, suggestions she no longer felt the need to follow immediately. Daniel stood near the window. As usual. Miles was in his chair. As usual. There had been small movements already that morning. Hands. Adjustments. Controlled, quiet progress that didn't demand attention. Nothing that suggested anything more. Then, Miles shifted forward. Not carefully. Not in the measured way he had been taught. Just forward, his feet pressed against the floor. Firm. Sabrina noticed that first. The pressure. Different from before. She looked up. Miles's hands rested briefly against the sides of the chair. Then, he stood. No warning. No pause. No visible preparation. Just up. For a second, no one moved. Not even him. He stayed there. Balanced. Still. Sabrina's body reacted before her mind did. She leaned forward slightly, her hands pressing against the edge of her chair, ready. But she didn't move. Daniel didn't either. Miles looked down at his feet, then at his hands, then slowly at Sabrina. There was no excitement in his face. No sudden rush of emotion. Just a kind of quiet awareness. Like he hadn't expected it either. Sabrina felt something rise in her chest. Sharp. Not fear. Not relief. Something deeper. She stood up slowly. Careful not to break whatever this was. "Miles," she said. Her voice didn't carry far. He didn't respond, but he didn't sit down either. He stayed there. For a few seconds more. Then, he lowered himself back into the chair. Controlled. Deliberate. The same way he had stood. Sabrina exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath again. Daniel stepped forward slightly. Not toward Miles. Just closer. "You felt that?" he asked. Miles nodded. "Yes." The word came without strain. Without distance. Daniel nodded once. "Good." That was all. Sabrina looked at him. Then back at Miles. "Did it hurt?" she asked. Miles shook his head. "No." The word landed differently this time. Clear. Certain. Sabrina sat back down slowly. Her hands rested against her knees, fingers pressing lightly into the fabric. She didn't speak again, because anything she said would have been too much. The rest of the day didn't rush forward. There was no sudden increase in effort. No attempt to repeat what had just happened. Daniel didn't ask for it again. Sabrina didn't either. Miles stayed in the chair. Moved when he needed to. Rested when he didn't. The moment stayed where it was. Untouched. Later, when the therapist arrived, Sabrina didn't lead with it. She let the session begin as usual. watched, waited. Then, midway through, "He stood this morning," she said. The therapist paused, her hands stilled. "What?" Sabrina didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on Miles. He stood up. A beat. The therapist turned fully toward her. "Without assistance?" "Yes." "How long?" "A few seconds." The therapist's posture shifted, more alert now, more focused. "That's significant," she said. Sabrina nodded, but she didn't feel the word the way the therapist did. Significant implied something measurable, something that could be tracked. This didn't feel like that. It felt quieter, heavier. The therapist stepped closer to Miles. "Can you try again?" she asked. Miles hesitated. Sabrina saw it immediately. The pause, the slight shift in his shoulders. Before the movement, before anything happened. "No," Daniel said. The word came from behind them. Calm, but firm. The therapist turned. Sabrina didn't. "Why not?" the therapist asked. Daniel stepped forward slightly, because he didn't plan it the first time. The therapist frowned. "That doesn't mean he can't. It does right now." The interruption wasn't sharp, but it held. The therapist looked at Sabrina, waiting. Sabrina felt the weight of that glance, the expectation, the authority she had always carried in moments like this. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at Miles, at the small tension returning to his shoulders, at the way his hands rested, no longer as easy as before. "Then, not today," she said. "Quiet. Final." The therapist hesitated, then stepped back. "All right. Not agreement, but acceptance." That evening, the house felt different. Not louder, not lighter. Just changed. Sabrina moved through it without rushing, without checking her phone every few minutes, without filling the space with decisions. She found Miles in the same room, the same chair, but he didn't feel the same. She sat beside him, close, not hovering. "You stood?" she said. He looked at her, then nodded. "Yes." A pause. "How did it feel?" He thought about it, not searching for the right answer, just remembering. "Easy." The words stayed. Sabrina nodded slowly. She didn't smile, didn't react the way she thought she might. Instead, she reached out and rested her hand lightly over his. Not guiding, not correcting, just there. Miles didn't pull away. Later that night, Sabrina stood outside again. The same place Daniel had been the night before. The edge of the garden, the space where things didn't feel controlled. He joined her without a word. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then, "You knew this would happen," she said. "Not a question." Daniel shook his head. "No." Sabrina glanced at him. "You didn't?" "No." A pause. "I hoped." The difference settled. Sabrina looked back out into the dark. He stood like it wasn't a big deal. Daniel nodded. "That's how it should feel." Another pause. Sabrina crossed her arms lightly. "I've spent years trying to make things happen for him." Her voice stayed steady. "I brought in the best people, the best systems, everything that was supposed to work." She exhaled slowly. "And this happened in a moment no one planned." Daniel didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice stayed even. "You didn't make it happen." Sabrina frowned slightly. "No." A pause. "You made space for it." The words settled. Different from anything she had been told before. She didn't respond immediately, didn't try to reshape them. For once, she let them stay as they were. And something in her shifted with them. Not control, not certainty. Something quieter, but stronger. The next morning didn't feel like a continuation. It felt separate. Not disconnected, but not carrying the same weight as the day before. The moment of Miles standing didn't sit in the house like something fragile that might break if touched. It settled. Quietly. Sabrina noticed that first. She woke expecting something, some urgency, some need to check, to confirm it hadn't been a one-time thing. But when she stepped into the hallway, the house felt normal, not empty, not tense, just still. She paused outside Miles's room. The door was open. He was awake, sitting the same way he always had. For a second, it almost felt like nothing had changed. Then, he shifted, not forward, not toward standing, just adjusted, easily, without thinking about it. Sabrina stepped inside. "Good morning," she said. Miles looked at her. "Morning." His voice carried a little more now, still quiet, but not distant. She sat down beside him, not as close as before, not as careful, just sat. They stayed like that for a moment. No pressure, no expectation. "Then, are you going to try again?" she asked. The question came out softer than she intended. Miles didn't answer right away. He looked at his hands, then at the floor, then back at her. "I don't know. Honest. Simple." Sabrina nodded. "That's okay." And she meant it. Daniel came in later, same way as always. No announcement, no shift in the room when he entered. Just presence. He stood near the door for a moment, watching, then stepped inside. "You don't have to do anything today," he said. Not to Sabrina, to Miles. Miles looked at him. "Okay." The word came without hesitation. Daniel nodded once. "That's where we keep it." Sabrina watched him. There was something different in the way they spoke now. Less instruction, more understanding. She stood up slowly. "I have calls this morning," she said. Not to either of them specifically, just stating it. Miles nodded. Daniel didn't respond. Sabrina paused at the door, then looked back. "I'll be upstairs." And for the first time in a long time. She left without staying to watch. The calls didn't feel the same. They hadn't for a while, but this time the difference was clear. People spoke, offered updates, solutions, new directions. Sabrina listened. But something in her had shifted. She didn't interrupt as much, didn't push for timelines, didn't ask how quickly things could change. At one point, someone asked a question. "What outcome are you prioritizing right now?" Sabrina paused. The answer used to come easily. Measured, defined, clear. Now, she hesitated, then said, "Consistency." The word surprised even her. There was a pause on the other end of the call. Then, "That's a longer path." "I know." Her voice stayed even. But something underneath it had settled. She ended the call shortly after. Not abruptly, just finished. When she went back downstairs, the house was quiet again. Not empty, just steady. She found Miles in the same room, but this time, he wasn't sitting. He stood near the table, not holding on to anything, not bracing, just standing. His posture wasn't perfect. There was still a slight shift in his balance, a carefulness in the way he held himself. But he was there, on his own. Sabrina stopped in the doorway, didn't move, didn't speak. Miles looked at her. A small pause. Then, "Hi." The word came easily. Sabrina felt something move through her chest. Not sharp, not overwhelming, just real. "Hi," she said. Her voice didn't carry far. She stepped forward slowly. Not rushing, not cautious. Just moving. Miles didn't sit down, didn't reach for anything. He stayed where he was. Sabrina stopped a few feet away, close enough to see everything. The way his shoulders held, the way his breath stayed even, the way his hands rested at his sides without tension. She nodded once. "You're standing." It sounded simple, but it wasn't. Miles nodded. "Yes." A pause. Then, "I wanted to see if I could." Sabrina exhaled, a slow breath. And this time, she let it out fully. "That's good," she said. No extra words, no added meaning, just that. Daniel was nearby, not in the room, but close enough. Sabrina noticed him after a moment. He didn't step in, didn't interrupt, just watched, the same way he always had. But something about it felt different now. Less like observation, more like completion. Sabrina looked at him briefly. He nodded once. That was all. The rest of the day didn't build on it. There was no sudden progression, no push for more. Miles sat when he needed to, moved when he felt ready, stood again once, briefly, without announcement, without attention. It became part of the day, not separate from it. That evening, Sabrina sat alone in the living room. No phone, no laptop, just the quiet. She hadn't done that in a long time. Not like this. Not without something pulling her attention away. The house moved around her. Soft sounds, distant steps. Life continuing without needing her to direct it. She leaned back slightly, closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Later she stood in Miles's doorway again. He was asleep. The same light, the same stillness, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. She stepped inside, moved closer, not carefully, not hesitantly, just naturally. She sat on the edge of the bed, watched him for a moment, then reached out and adjusted the blanket slightly. A small thing, something she could have asked someone else to do, but she didn't. She stayed there a little longer, then stood, turned toward the door. Daniel was there, leaning lightly against the frame. She hadn't heard him approach. "You didn't try to make him do it again," he said. "Not a question." Sabrina shook her head. "No." A pause. "He did it on his own." Daniel nodded. "That's the difference." The words settled. Sabrina looked at Miles one more time, then back at Daniel. "For a long time," she said quietly, "I thought this was about fixing something." Daniel didn't respond. She didn't expect him to. "I kept looking at what was missing," she added. A pause. "And trying to force it into place." She exhaled slowly. "But that's not what this was." Daniel held her gaze. "No." Sabrina nodded. Her eyes didn't leave his. It was about seeing what was already there. The words came without effort, without weight, just true. Daniel didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Sabrina stepped past him into the hallway. The house felt the same, but she didn't. And for the first time, she didn't try to change that.